That's cool. Yeah.
Did you do that at the house? Did she make the coffee and percolate it on the gas stove? That's like the best cup of coffee I've ever had.
I remember having coffee. Pretty late today.
We want to do like introductions.
Yeah, let's talk about it.
I have. It's been a while.
I don't know what to say.
Here's the Salt River. 1, 2, here we go.
Hey, we're here to celebrate this pretty unique guitar right here. We'll talk about that in a minute, but we got Kenny Smith, Bryan Sutton, Chris Eldridge, and I'm Bob Minner. And this guitar right here is a 1936 D-18, and it just happens to be the guitar on the cover of Whiskey Before Breakfast. It's not the guitar on the record, and also on the back.
Front and back.
The full body shot on the back. And so this guitar has kind of come into my possession for like a week, so I figured why not share it with some friends. And so this guitar it's owned by a gentleman named Brent Hawley in Colorado Springs, and he's decided to sell this guitar. And like you can tell, it's that guitar except the replaced pickguard, different bridge, and the fingerboard's been replaced. Jim Baggett did all the setup work on it. And we're just going to talk about this guitar and talk about this record. So when did you buy this record first, Kenny?
I bought this record. I grew up in a trailer court, so I mowed yards pretty much all summer. And so there was a record store. It was pretty close to my house, and they had a Bluegrass section. And I went in there one day, and they were going out of business. And so I put all my money that I'd made that summer and put it up on thing. I said, "Can I buy the whole Bluegrass section?" And the guy said, "Yeah." I said, "You come in there all the time." I said, "Take it on." So this record was actually in that group of records that I got. I mean, I had like some really good ones, like the Quintet album, some Tony Rice, but there were 2 or 3 Norman Blake album, but this one was in that batch, and I really wanted this one because I'd heard about it, and I already had the Norman Blake Old and New record, and so when I got this one, I just remember seeing that cover and the D-18, and then reading the stuff that Nancy had wrote on the back. It was just, I mean, you felt like you knew Norman through his music, but then you had that. The liner notes was just that extra thing into, it's kind of about the session and everything. And that was, I loved that about the albums.
How old were you?
I was probably around 12, 11 or 12 years old.
You've been playing a bunch to that?
No, I'd played rhythm. My dad was a fiddler, so I basically played rhythm up until I started, getting these records. And Norman was really the first guy I heard play fiddle tunes on the guitar. So that was my first, that was my first introduction. Oh wow, we can play these melodies on a guitar. Yeah. And so I just kind of gravitated towards Norman. I mean, and it was just because he was the first guy I heard do that on TV. Yeah. But then, it was just, I kind of heard what Dad was playing on the fiddle, what Norman, since he played fiddle too, it was I don't know, it was all relative to me,
When did you get the record, Bryan?
I came into a lot of Norman records a little later. Just, I don't know if it's a North Carolina thing, but to your point of like the first person we heard playing fiddle tunes on the guitar, I mean, there was a bunch of local guys around Asheville, and then of course it's Doc Watson territory. It took a while for me to kind of branch outside of Doc Watson and then into Tony Rice. I was up into my teens before I started listening to Clarence and Norman. And it was really cool, because I'd spent a lot of my formative years just so Doc and Tony focused, and then when Clarence and Norman kind of came along for me, I had already been kind of deep into it, and I could see all the connections. I remember getting the Blake and Rice records for some of the first ones, and you could hear the influence of Norman on Tony, and you could hear the influence of Doc on Norman, and just sort of putting all these pieces together as far as like that Mount Rushmore of flat pickers. And I remember, then moving to Nashville a few years after I graduated from high school and doing a lot of just driving around, and I would go to the old Tower Records on West End Avenue, and I didn't have an appointment to buy the whole Bluegrass section, but I would go in there with Aubrey Haney a lot of times and just buy bags of CDs and just stuff that I didn't have, and they always had it, and that was one of those in there that day, and and that and others, the Sulphur Springs and all the stuff, and that was my deep sort of education into Norman was again kind of gradually getting there, and then up to my shoulders in it.
Yeah. And a little bit more, maybe a little bit more, would you say a little bit more organic than Doc? Or a little more.
Well, it's interesting. I was, driving down here trying to think, what are the things that sort of separate me, and I think this record does it in his playing. It's just what he can do solo-wise. And Doc always had a version of it, but the way Norman, to Kenny's point too, plays melody, but there's also just such a strong, open, rhythmic right hand and chords that flow along with the melody. It's just fiery and big and rhythmic, and he's like his own band in that regard.
Yeah.
That's when I think about Norman and kind of, again, where he sits in my head as far as like an inspiration or kind of a target, it's always that. It's that sort of funky pocket with just a lot of big sound.
Yeah.
And I think it's always interesting too to think, like, why would Norman choose a particular guitar when I played other guitars that he owned, and like I try to get like what would have Norman been hearing in this, and it's like a lot of these characteristics, just big, open, resonant kind of thing.
Yeah.
And you can whether it's a small body or a D size like that, you can feel how he liked the way the thing thumped.
Yeah.
I could, when you were playing it a minute ago, I could hear that that low end, that air moving.
Yeah, absolutely. Kurt, how about you? What was your thing with this record?
So this record, like Bryan, I kind of came to playing bluegrass not through Norman initially. Obviously my family and my dad being in the Seldom scene and all that. I grew up around the music, and Tony was my first big flat picking hero. But when I started to get a little older, my mom had all these old vinyl records because she's a banjo player too. That's how I came to exist, is I'm the progeny of two banjo players, which is
Two wrongs make a right.
Quite frightening if you think about it. I know. I know. I've got 10 fingers, which is miraculous, and there's no webbing, which I didn't know that could happen with banjo players put together. Anyway, so she had all these cool old records, and it was just something that kind of, when I got a little older, but I was a flat picker, I kind of self-identified that way. I just remember going through the vinyl and just listening, starting to listen to Norman Blake stuff, and just I don't know, being struck by kind of the same things you guys are saying. Norman just had this. There's just kind of a funky, earthy honesty and a completeness to everything that Norman does that's just so good, and it feels so intimate. Norman, he's a guy who plays music, and you feel like you know him. You feel like you're like friends with Norman, or you feel like Norman's friends with you. The way he plays music. It's so approachable, but also just beastly when he wants it to be. And that was, I don't know, that's a cool thing. I mean, I remember the first Norman Blake record I actually got way into wasn't this one. It was Live at McCabe's.
Yeah.
But that was kind of when I realized, like, this guy is just an absolute beast of a musician. But then you kind of go back and, like, I feel like this record's a little that's on there at times, but it's kind of softer. It's a little more approachable. It's like a little more of like a living room record. Some of the finger picking stuff and the slower numbers, but I don't know. Norman is, he's Mount Rushmore. Also, it's a funny thing. I've actually got 2 copies of this at home on vinyl. Yeah. And one of them, it says "Stolen from Diana Haynes," which is my mom's maiden name.
Nice.
On the back. I was like, it made me smile when I saw that.
Yeah. The original one, if you had the shrink wrap, it had the black sticker Norman Blake's guitar album on that. And I actually found I got this copy, and then I got a Japanese import, which is really interesting. And then I actually, on Discogs, I actually found a copy of this sealed. And I haven't opened it yet. I'm just going to leave it. And it's got the sticker and everything. But I was 12 years old also when I got this record. I had enough money from playing, here we go with banjo stuff again. I was playing banjo in a bluegrass gospel group. And I saved enough money, which I never thought you could make that much money with a bluegrass gospel group, enough to afford a record. Yeah. But I had enough money to buy a record and a cheap Bentley acoustic guitar. And I I think the only reason I got this record is because my dad had the Circle album, and I recognized Norman Blake for some reason, and then the picture also in the cover of the Circle album. And so I bought the record, bought the guitar, and went home. And my mom and dad had this huge behemoth console stereo, and I remember putting the record on, and of course, Hand Me Down My Walking Cane just hits me in the face. And I'm kind of like trying to figure out, like, why doesn't my Bentley guitar sound like that? And it took me a long time to kind of like go, okay, this is a vintage Martin. This is what this means and what this does and the functionality of it. But I remember just, being that kid looking at the pictures and geeking over that and wondering, like, who is this guy? And then the liner notes and everything. And so that's kind of how I got into it. And so, yeah, pretty great record. So this is the guitar. You can kind of see, of course, there's been some playware added, but you got this right here, and then there's a little wear right here, a little fading. So, like I said, Brent got this guitar from Norman by way of Rob Griffin, who was a friend of Norman's, who occasionally played with Norman. And he got it in late 75, and he's had it ever since. So it's just kind of been one of those guitars that, I just kind of wondered what happened to it. Where was it, And,
well, Norman's had so many guitars have gone through his hands over the years too. And I feel like they're all iconic because that Norman just knows what's up with guitars. He's such an interesting guitar person, such an interesting, and I say this in the best way, tinkerer, like in the sense that he kind of does his own modifications to the guitars. He changes changes the nut and figures out what exact string gauge, what combination of string gauges each guitar likes, which is really cool. But it's like, obviously, if he cares that much to do all that, you kind of just trust that if Norman found a guitar, that's a guitar that you want to know about, or I want to see every guitar Norman Blake ever had.
Yeah, Kenny and I went down to Norman's, and we was talking about all the guitars, and I asked myself, well, what was the first guitar that you had when you came to Nashville? What'd you have? He says, well, I had Charlie Monroe's D45.
Sure, okay.
That's a pretty good one to start with,
Oh.
Yeah. And it was just kind of amazing to have him take us through the whole story of, where'd you get this guitar? Where'd you get this? And yeah. And
does he remember all that stuff? Does he kind of know every?
He remembered everything. He told us everything. Yeah. And one thing that came up, I asked Norman, I said, man, I understand why, because I had played most of his guitars. And I said, I understand why you bought these guitars and why you played them. But I said, I don't understand how you sold them or why you sold them, And one of the things he said was, he goes, I just figured after a while, he said, I just felt like I got everything I could out of that guitar. And he said, I just felt like it was time to move on to something newer. And then he said, if you look at all those guitars, he told me and Bob, he said, if you look at all those guitars, he said they were kind of in different periods of his music. And he said that's why he said I moved on to something else that kind of gave him a different sound. But all the ones that I played, it's just been
pretty phenomenal
up here. Yeah,
that's the crazy thing about guitars. Like getting a new guitar is, I feel like getting a guitar can be the best teacher. Like I remember I had Nick Forster let me be the custodian of Charles Sawtell's old D-28 for a few years, which you're hanging on to right now, right?
I don't have it anymore, but I had it for a while. Yeah, I've played it a lot. It's been around.
It's an amazing guitar, and that was the first time I'd ever had a guitar of that caliber that was functionally my guitar for a while, and I just remember I learned so much from that guitar. It was not a guitar that bent to my will, but if I kind of would meet it where it was. If I could take the lessons that it had to offer me, it became pretty profound. Like that guitar it's not totally even all over the neck. It's not particularly fast, but it really rewards playing long notes down low. And you think about how Charles Sawtelle played guitar. You think about a lot of how he built that up. It makes sense, that was his guitar. And I feel like I learned a lot about playing that way from having that guitar. It was my teacher, and that's kind of what Norman's talking about there.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, just from talking to him, he just said, that he had got everything he could out of it. And he said just for him, he said it was time to move on to something that new. And I don't know if you look at the kind of the order, they were progressively, they were all good, I thought. But I don't know how, it's just amazing that he had that many guitars that were that good. That's, like I say, I got this one in 95 and that's been pretty much it.
Right.
Something to be said for that too.
Well, yeah, but it was just like, it almost felt like, hey, this one, I tried this one out and I like this one better. That's what it sounded like. When he was talking to, Bob and I was like, man, he goes, hey, this one came up for sale, so I jumped on it.
Right. Yeah. And like Tony, the Antiques, that was his guitar. He had Santa Cruz stuff, but it's interesting how some people can stick with one guitar forever, and a guy like Norman, and also begs the point too with Norman, with all of those different guitars, whether it be like an LOO or an a D-18, his style never changed, his essence never changed. It was always Norman, regardless of the guitar, and because sometimes, if I'm playing a small body, I play it much differently than I would this, Of course, depending on the song, too, But the guitar changes the way I approach it. But Norman was just like himself through everything.
This is going to be the first song on the Whiskey Before Breakfast record from Norman Blake. Hand Me Down My Walking Cane. Going to play it here on a 1936 D-18, which is featured on the cover of this record and the back of this record. It's cool how that works out. Bob Minner and I are going to take our best swat at this tune. He's got another 36 D-18.
Yes, sir.
Frankie?
Frankie.
Why'd you name it Frankie?
That was part of the deal.
Really?
The old man who originally had it was named Frank, and Frank Stafford. You can kind of see that S right here. I'm glad he didn't spell his whole name across the top.
Sure.
But it was the deal. The guy says, I'll sell it to you, but you have to keep calling it Frankie. I said, that's a small price to pay for it.
The guitar stories are just as good as the guitars themselves. All right, so I'll kick it off. 1, 2.
Well, I got high, Lord, I got in jail. Lord, I got high, and I got in jail. I got high and I got in jail. I had no money for to go my bill. My sins, they have overtaken me. Lord, hand me down my walking cane. Lord, hand me down my walking cane. Hand me down my walking cane. I'm gonna leave on the morning train. My sins, they have overtaken me. Well, the beans was tough and the meat was fat. Lord, the beans were tough and the meat was fat. Lord, the meat was tough and the beans were fat. Lord, good God, I couldn't eat that. My sins, they have overtaken me. Lord, hand me down my walking cane. Lord, hand me down my walking cane. Hand me down my walking cane. I'm gonna leave on the morning train. My sins, they have overtaken me. come on, Mom, and go my bail. Come on, Mama, and go my bail. Get me out of this Nashville jail. My sins, they have overtaken me. Well, if I die in Tennessee, yeah, if I die in Tennessee, boy, if I die in Tennessee, ship me back by COD. My sins, they have overtaken me. Well, hand me down my walking cane. Lord, hand me down my walking cane. Hand me down my walking cane. I'm gonna leave on the morning train. My sins, they have overtaken me. Take it, Bob. Well, hand me down my walking cane. Lord, hand me down my walking cane. Hand me down my walking cane. I'm gonna leave on the morning train. My sins, they have overtaken me. Yeah, hand me down my walking cane. I'm gonna leave on the morning train. My sins, they have overtaken me.
All right, so yeah, I did draw the long straw here. I got the Blake guitar that we've been talking about, and the reason that we're kind of all here today, and it's a pretty awesome guitar. It's really fun to play. Just got that Norman Blakey vibe. Just feel it coursing through there.
Blakey vibe.
Blakey.
Yeah, the D-18s are ruling the day. This is a 35 D-18 that I've had for 6 or 8 years or so. Pretty stock, pretty in great shape. Sounds, I love it. It's awesome. It's one of the best guitars I've got, if not the best. Don't tell my D28 that though, please. It's sensitive.
Yeah, you're partial to that. This is a 1936 D-18. This is otherwise known as Frankie, and it's just my go-to. It's the one that works for me, and I just love it.
If that's all you got.
Yeah.
What's the serial number difference in these two?
So this is 64556.
This is 62180. Looks like.
Now I do know that was a early January stamp date for the block, and it cleared final inspection in May. So that's what I know. And this was October 9th stamp date and cleared inspection on December 11th.
Wow.
So for all that geeky
Love it.
stamp final inspection stuff.
This is a 1935 D-18. I've owned it since 1995. Recently found out that this was the first Dreadnought guitar ever in the state of Colorado. And that's the original owner had bought it from Martin.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah, I remember you telling me that story. And Greg Hutton confirmed that.
yeah, confirmed it. Yeah,
And Greg Hutton said that this was the first D-18 sold in the state of Florida. And he says, well, there was only one 36 D-18 ever sent to a Florida dealer, and that was what was the name of the music? Phil Pitt's Music in Miami. And I can't prove that this is the guitar from Phil Pitt's, but I don't think during that time there was many 36s floating around in lower Florida with the alligators and swamps and stuff. So, yeah, it's kind of the history of it. Do you know the history of that one? Anything about it?
No, don't.
Yeah.
Don't know a thing. I know
Just
that I
that it's
walked
good.
into Carter Vintage and there it was, and it called my name.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
it.
And I walked away from it, and it wouldn't stop calling my name.
All right, I'm going to be playing Arkansas Traveler, which I learned right off of this album here. This is reason I like this song is because it was the first flat picking tune I learned to connect all the lines. And I don't know how many times I have spun that record trying to learn that second part, the B part. I just couldn't connect the lines, and then I remember I was in my bedroom there, and I finally connect that B part, and I can actually play a flat picking tune. So, yeah, all right, we'll try it.
Hey, this is Sleepy Eyed Joe and Indian Creek off of the, as you guessed it, we've been talking about it, the Whiskey Before Breakfast album.
Chris Eldridge, and we've got this amazing old guitar that used to belong to Norman Blake. It's a 1936 D-18, pictured here in there. And anyway, this record that this guitar is gracing the cover of is Whiskey Before Breakfast, and this is the record that introduced the world to Norman's song Church Street Blues. So I'm going to play Church Street Blues in a style inspired, lifted directly from Norman Blake.
I've been hanging out uptown, hoodie that low down rain, watching Good Time Charlie friends is driving me insane. Up on shady Charlotte Street, though the green lights look red, wish I was back home on the farm, looking at my feather bed. And I got myself a rocking chair to see if I can lose these thin dime hard times, headlong Church Street blues. neighbor friend. Read yesterday's news, folded up page 21, and I stuck it in my shoes. Gave me a nickel to the poor, my good deed for the day. Folded up my old billfold and threw it far away. And I got myself a rocking chair to see if I could snooze these thin dime hard time headlong churchy blues. Some guitar strings, old black diamond brand. I string up this old Martin box and I go and join some band. But I guess I better sit right here and I pick and sing a while. Try to make me a little change and give you folks a smile.